The list continues to grow of the governors now seeking to ban Syrian refugees from settling into their states. That would be those marked in the red, and we just keep adding them every day. A good number of them say they are concerned about the rigor and depth of background checks.
We've asked our Eamon Javers to sign up the screening process, in fact, and he joins us with what he's found. Hi, Eamon.
Yeah, hi, Kelly. This is a debate that has begun to shift fairly dramatically here just in the past hour or so. It had been mostly Republican governors who were calling for a pause in the Syrian refugee program. Within the past hour, though, we saw some comments from Senator Chuck Schumer, a Democrat of New York, also saying that he thinks maybe it is time for a pause in that Syrian refugee program. So that might be the first of the Democrats to start to crumble here as far as Barack Obama and the administration is concerned. They still support this program. And to that end, earlier this afternoon, we saw a conference call here from senior administration officials walking reporters through exactly how they do this vetting of people who are part of the refugee program. Let me put up a full screen here for you and show you exactly what they briefed us on so you will get a sense of how thorough they are arguing this process is. They say that they check names against databases including the FBI, the National Counterterrorism Center, and the Department of Defense to see if these people have had any interactions with any of those agencies and are on any wild. They also say they check biometric data, by which they mean fingerprints and other biological data, to see if any of that is covered inside U.S. databases as well. And then what they have a specific process, they say, for the Syrian refugees themselves called the Syria Enhanced Review. That, they say, revolves around a face-to-face interview between a Department of Homeland Security employee who is specifically trained to elicit details from these people's lives to vet their stories. And they say they actually go so far as to check their life story, their life narrative that they give to the Department of Homeland Security to see if they said that they were in a particular town that was bombed on a particular day. They check historical records to see if, in fact, there was a bombing on that day in that town, all designed to sort of suss out who's telling the truth about their background and who is not. Now, Republicans and critics would argue that this vetting is only as good as the terrorism databases that it depends on, and if we don't know who these people are, if they've been radicalized within the past year or 6 months or 8 months, we'll have no way of checking into these databases to find out if these are dangerous people or not, guys.
Okay, Eamon, thank you. Earlier today, Speaker of the House Paul Ryan weighed in on this issue. Take a listen.
This is a moment where it's better to be safe than to be sorry. So we think the prudent, the responsible things take a pause in this particular aspect of this refugee program in order to verify that terrorists are not trying to infiltrate the refugee population.
Well, joining us now on a first on CNBC interview, we welcome Representative Bob Goodlatte. The Republican of Virginia who chairs the House Judiciary Committee. Representative Goodlatte has called on the president to rescind his plan to take in these Syrian refugees. And you did that, sir, even before the Paris attacks. So do you differ with House Speaker Ryan, who's calling for a moratorium, or do you want to make this permanent? You never want to receive refugees. What's your plan here?
No, I agree with the Speaker. Our concern arose when we had a consultation with the Secretary of State, John Kerry, in which he announced they were going to increase the number of refugees coming into the country, and then a few days later announced we're going to increase it 10,000 more, and those would be Syrian refugees. The president, it's the only immigration program where the president gets to set the cap, not the Congress. So I think that should be changed. However, the issue with Syria relates to the security. Shortly after that, we had the FBI director, Comey, testify before the committee, and I asked him about their ability to vet Syrian refugees, and he was very clear that they did not have the resources or the information that could assure that these were not terrorists coming into this country. We've had terrorists come into the country under the Iraqi refugee program. The French have said that the refugee issue in Europe is playing a part into this. ISIS has said they're going to use our immigration programs to get people into this country. It seems common sense to me to take a pause and say we're not going to bring refugees into this country from an area where we know that there's a serious threat.
But does that then rule out pretty much all the Middle East and North Africa?
It rules out Syria and Iraq initially. I think that's the important thing to do in response to this immediate threat, and we'll do something about that this week. But we have a larger refugee reform bill that we're working through the Judiciary Committee right now. You can expect to see that sometime right after Thanksgiving, and that would address many broader concerns about how the refugee program works right now.
But in the spirit of Kelly's question, you know, the critics of those who are calling for a moratorium or just not allowing any of the Syrian refugees in here is that it sets a precedent for a nation that accepts refugees from all over the world at all times. So are we going to set a precedent of not any refugees into this country just because we're worried about one particular group coming into our borders?
No, I think the situation in Syria and in parts of Iraq is much worse than anywhere else in the world because we don't have, and the FBI director confirmed, they don't have the ability to go to Syria and get records. They don't have the ability to go to Syria and interview neighbors and acquaintances of people to find out whether or not they have a clean background. And that's different than most other places, including Libya and other North African places.
But as you well know, we have immigrants coming into this country all the time. You know, a terrorist could come in at any moment without us knowing about it simply because they had the right paperwork. So how do you stop? I understand the spirit of what you're trying to do with the Syrian refugees, but how do you stop the flow overall otherwise?
Well, we are a nation of immigrants, but we're also a nation of laws, so we need to make sure that those immigration laws are working as effectively as possible. And when you have a situation like you have in Syria, we should put a moratorium on bringing refugees in from that country. Not permanently, but until the FBI director, until the Secretary of Homeland Security can certify that the people coming in here are not going to be terrorist threats. That's exactly where we should go.
Before we let you go, Congressman, is all of this a piece of what you would advocate for an even tougher standard for letting people into this country than we currently have?
Well, I do believe that our immigration laws across the board are not being enforced effectively by this administration. We have a series of bills that have already been reported out of the Judiciary Committee dealing with interior enforcement. The Homeland Security Committee has a bill dealing with border security. Those bills should be brought to the floor and voted on as soon as possible. But in the meantime, addressing this particular problem as identified by the FBI director and acknowledged by others as being a problem with getting adequate data, we should not bring Syrian refugees into the country. We already provide a tremendous amount of resources for the refugee camps in Jordan, in Turkey, far more than any other country, by the way. We also bring in refugees from elsewhere in the world, far more than any other nation. 2/3 of all the UN refugees come into the United States. So we have nothing to apologize for here on our refugee policy, but we also have to address the security of U.S. citizens, particularly seeing what's happening in Europe right now.
Got to go. Thank you so much. Good to see you, Representative Goodlatte. I grew up in his district, so it's close to home.
There you are.